Hello, everyone. Welcome to Stories for Sleep, where your night gets a little more magical, one story at a time. Whether you're here to drift into a peaceful slumber or just need a little escape from the day, you've found the perfect place. Get cozy, relax, and let these tales whisk you away to worlds beyond your wildest dreams. But before we begin, don't forget to hit that like button, share this soothing adventure with someone who needs it, and subscribe to stay connected with our nightly stories. Ready for an unforgettable journey? Let's dive in. In the quiet village of Hollow Brook, there stood an old library. It was built of dark stone, and its tall windows were covered with thick layers of dust. People said the library was cursed, but no one truly believed it until strange things began happening. At midnight, villagers claimed to see a shadow walking inside, even though the library was locked. Those who dared to peek inside heard soft whispers, but could never find anyone. Emma, a curious young woman, loved mysteries. She had just moved to the village and was intrigued by the stories. One evening, she overheard some villagers warning each other about staying away from the library. Emma decided she would uncover the truth. She packed a flashlight, a notebook, and a little courage, ready to face the mystery. Emma waited until the village was asleep. The moon cast an eerie glow on the cobblestone streets as she approached the library. The heavy wooden door creaked as she pushed it open. Inside, the air was cold and smelled of old paper. Shelves towered above her, filled with books that hadn't been touched in decades. The silence was so deep, she could hear her own heartbeat. As the clock struck midnight, Emma heard a faint sound. It was a soft tap, like someone walking slowly. She froze, her flashlight trembling in her hand. A shadow moved at the edge of the room. She called out, "Is someone there?" But there was no reply. The shadow stopped for a moment, then disappeared behind the shelves. Emma decided to follow the shadow. Her footsteps echoed as she walked deeper into the library. She found an old staircase leading to the basement. The whispers grew louder, and Emma's heart raced. She told herself it was just the wind, but the sound felt alive. She reached the bottom of the stairs and found a locked door. On the door, there were strange symbols carved into the wood. Suddenly, a voice whispered her name. "Emma?" She turned around, her flashlight darting through the darkness. The room was empty, but the voice spoke again, this time louder. Emma's hands shook as she tried to stay calm. "Who's there?" she asked, but no answer came. She knew she couldn't leave without solving the mystery. Emma found a small desk near the door with an old diary sitting on it. Dust covered its leather cover, but when she opened it, the pages were clean. The first words made her shiver. "The shadow lives here. It seeks the one who dares to stay." She flipped through the pages and found drawings of the shadow. Each drawing showed it growing larger, darker, and more menacing. Just as Emma was reading, the room grew colder. Her breath turned to mist, and the lights of her flashlight flickered. She heard footsteps again, louder and closer. Emma clutched the diary and backed away. The shadow emerged from the darkness, tall and shapeless, with glowing eyes that seemed to burn into her soul. Emma stood frozen as the shadow moved closer. Then she noticed something strange. It wasn't attacking her. Instead, it pointed toward the diary in her hands. She opened the last page, where she found a message. "Release me by burning this book, or I will walk forever." Emma realized the shadow was trapped, cursed to haunt the library. With trembling hands, Emma lit a match. As the flames consumed the diary, the shadow began to fade. It let out a soft, sorrowful sigh before disappearing entirely. The library grew silent again, and the coldness lifted. Emma left the library just as the sun began to rise. She felt a strange mix of fear and accomplishment. The shadow was gone, but the mystery of who had trapped it remained unsolved. Emma couldn't sleep after her encounter with the shadow. The villagers noticed she was quieter and seemed distant. One old man, Mr. Turner, approached her in the marketplace. "You've been to the library, haven't you?" he asked in a hushed voice. Emma hesitated but nodded. Mr. Turner's eyes widened and he leaned closer. "Stay away from it. The shadow isn't free yet." Curiosity burned inside Emma. "What do you mean? I destroyed the diary," she argued. Mr. Turner sighed and explained that the diary was only a part of the curse. "There's more to the story," he said. "The shadow was created by someone long ago, a person who wanted power but paid a terrible price." Emma decided to return to the library. This time she was prepared with candles and a map of the building she had found in the village archives. The map showed a hidden room behind the basement wall. She pushed aside old boxes and found a narrow wooden door. Its handle was ice cold, but she forced it open. Inside, the air was thick, and the room was filled with strange objects: mirrors, bones, and jars with mysterious powders. Mirrors, bones, and jars with mysterious powders. In the center of the room was a circle made of salt, and inside the circle lay a book. The title read, "The Ritual of Shadows." Emma knew this book might hold the answers she needed, but she also knew it could be dangerous. Emma carefully opened the book. Its pages were filled with spells and warnings. One page caught her attention. "The shadow is bound to its creator. To destroy it, the creator's secret must be uncovered." Emma realized she needed to find out who had summoned the shadow. She searched the room for clues and found a locket with a name engraved on it: Eliza Thorne. Emma took the locket and left the library. She asked the villagers if they knew Eliza Thorne, but most shook their heads. Finally, an old woman said, "Eliza was a strange girl. She vanished years ago, just before the library was abandoned." Emma felt chills run down her spine. Was Eliza the one who created the shadow? But determined to learn more, Emma returned to the library. This time she explored the upper floors. The walls were lined with portraits of people who had donated to the library, but one portrait stood out. It was a young woman with dark eyes and a sly smile. The name beneath the portrait read Eliza Thorne. As Emma stared at the painting, she noticed something chilling. The shadow in the background of the portrait seemed to move. She stepped closer, and the shadow's eyes locked onto hers. Suddenly, the glass of the frame shattered, and Emma fell back. She knew she had to act quickly before the shadow grew stronger. The shattered glass seemed to awaken the shadow. Emma felt a cold wind rush past her as she heard whispers growing louder. The shadow appeared, larger than before, and it spoke for the first time. "You cannot escape me," it hissed. Its voice was deep and echoed like 1,000 voices at once. Emma tried to stay calm. "Why are you here? What do you want?" she asked. The shadow pointed at the locket around her neck. "Eliza's greed made me. Her secrets keep me alive," it replied. Emma realized the locket might be the key to ending the curse, but she needed to know more about Eliza's secrets. Emma searched the library's records for any mention of Eliza Thorne. She discovered an old journal hidden inside a hollow book. The journal revealed that Eliza had been a librarian who practiced dark magic. She had summoned the shadow to guard a treasure hidden in the library. But the spell had gone wrong, trapping the shadow forever. Emma found a final page in the journal that described how to end the curse. She needed to find the treasure and destroy it with fire. The treasure, the journal said, was hidden beneath the library's floor, guarded by the shadow itself. Emma prepared herself for one last confrontation. End of chapter 20, Opening the Labyrinth. Emma returned to the library at midnight, carrying matches and oil. She found a loose floorboard near the center of the library and pried it open. Beneath it was a small chest covered in dust. As she reached for it, the shadow appeared, its form towering over her. "Leave, or you will never leave again," it growled. With trembling hands, Emma ignored the warning. She poured oil over the chest and lit a match. The flames roared, and the shadow let out a terrible scream. The room shook, and books fell from the shelves. When the fire died down, the shadow was gone, and the library fell silent. Emma walked out into the cool night air, knowing the curse was finally broken. The next morning, Emma woke up to a calm and peaceful hollow brook. The villagers had heard the commotion at the library, but were too afraid to check on her. When she returned to the marketplace, many stared at her in silence. Finally, Mr. Turner approached her with a cautious smile. "It's over, isn't it?" he asked softly. Emma nodded, though a strange unease lingered in her heart. "The shadow is gone and the curse is lifted," she replied. The villagers cheered, and some even thanked her for her bravery. But as Emma walked home, she couldn't shake the feeling that the shadow's story wasn't entirely over. A week passed, and Emma tried to settle into a normal life. But at night, she often dreamed of the shadow's glowing eyes. She would wake up in a cold sweat, convinced she heard whispers outside her window. One evening, she found the locket she had taken from the library glowing faintly. She opened it and discovered a small folded piece of paper tucked inside. The words were written in faded ink. "The shadow can never truly die. It will return to those who seek it." Emma's heart sank. She realized her battle with the shadow might not be over. Emma decided to revisit the library to make sure nothing had been left behind. To her surprise, the building looked different. The windows were no longer broken, and the doors seemed freshly painted. It was as if the library had repaired itself. When she stepped inside, the air felt warm and welcoming. But as Emma explored, she noticed small things that didn't feel right. The bookshelves were rearranged, and the strange symbols on the basement door were gone. She also heard faint footsteps echoing through the halls, even though she was alone. The library had changed, but it still held secrets. One night, Emma woke up to the sound of tapping on her bedroom window. When she looked outside, there was nothing there, but as she turned back to her bed, she saw a faint shadow on the wall. It moved slowly, as if searching for something. Emma froze, her breath catching in her throat. The shadow whispered, "You freed me, but I am never truly gone." Emma felt a chill run down her spine. She realized that destroying the treasure had only weakened the shadow, not destroyed it. Its essence lingered, tied to her through the locket she still kept. Emma sought help from the villagers, but most were too scared to listen. Only Mr. Turner believed her. He told her about an old ritual passed down through the generations, one that could banish the shadow forever. "It's risky," he warned. "You must face the shadow one last time and sever its connection to this world." The ritual required her to destroy the locket under the light of a full moon, but there was a catch. She had to perform it in the library where the shadow's power was strongest. Emma agreed, knowing this was her only chance to end the nightmare once and for all. On the night of the full moon, Emma entered the library for the last time. The air was heavy, and the shadows seemed to move on their own. She lit candles and placed the locket on the floor. As she began chanting the words Mr. Turner had given her, the shadow appeared, larger and darker than ever. The shadow roared, its voice shaking the walls. "You cannot defeat me," it bellowed. Emma held her ground, continuing the ritual. The locket began to glow, and the shadow writhed in pain. With one final chant, Emma smashed the locket with a heavy stone. The shadow let out a deafening scream before fading into nothingness. As the library grew silent, Emma felt a wave of relief wash over her. The curse was finally broken. She left the library knowing she had not only freed herself, but also the village from a terror that had haunted them for years. Days turned into weeks, and Hollowbrook finally seemed to breathe freely again. The villagers celebrated Emma's courage, and she was hailed as a hero. Yet, as much as Emma wanted to move on, she couldn't ignore the whispers that returned in the quiet of the night. Sometimes she'd hear faint voices calling her name, carried by the wind. One evening, Emma decided to confront the unsettling whispers. She stood by her window and called out, "Who's there? What do you want?" The air grew colder, and the faint outline of a shadow appeared on the far end of her garden. Though it looked smaller and weaker, it still sent a chill through her bones. Emma sought help from Mr. Turner once again. He listened carefully as she explained the shadow's reappearance. "It shouldn't be here anymore," he muttered, stroking his beard. He then asked, "Have you noticed anything unusual about yourself?" Emma hesitated but mentioned a strange mark that had appeared on her wrist after the final ritual. Mr. Turner examined the mark closely. It was a small, faint symbol shaped like a crescent moon. "This mark is the shadow's final link to you," he explained. "It's not as powerful as before, but it clings to you because you were the one who destroyed it." Emma realized the battle wasn't over yet. Determined to end the shadow's connection to her, Emma began researching the village's history. She uncovered records of strange occurrences dating back centuries. Hollowbrook had always been plagued by whispers of dark magic and mysterious disappearances. She found a particularly chilling entry about a young woman accused of summoning a shadowy figure to protect her secrets. The woman's name was not Eliza Thorne, but someone else. Margaret Willow. Eliza had only inherited the curse, much like Emma. The discovery left Emma shaken. "The shadow's roots go deeper than I thought," she murmured. It wasn't just her fight. The village had been cursed for generations. Mr. Turner suggested one final ritual to break the shadow's ties to the village. "This time, you'll need to banish it from the land entirely," he said. The ritual required Emma to return to the library with a rare herb called moonshade and burn it under the light of the crescent moon. The smoke would sever the shadow's link forever. Emma and Mr. Turner prepared carefully, gathering the herb and the tools needed. On the night of the crescent moon, they entered the library together. The air was thick with tension, and Emma felt the shadow's presence lurking nearby. This time, she wasn't alone, and that gave her courage. As Emma lit the moonshade, the shadow appeared, more aggressive than ever. It roared, its voice echoing through the library. "You cannot rid me of this place!" it bellowed. Emma and Mr. Turner held their ground, reciting the incantation together. The shadow lunged at them, but it seemed weaker, its form flickering in the candlelight. The smoke from the moonshade began to fill the room, and the shadow shrieked in agony. "You will regret this," it hissed, before retreating into the walls. The library trembled, and for a moment Emma feared it would collapse. But then, everything grew silent. The shadow was gone. The next morning, Hollowbrook felt different. The air was lighter, and the villagers spoke of a strange sense of peace. Emma walked through the marketplace, and for the first time in weeks, she didn't feel the weight of unseen eyes watching her. Mr. Turner smiled and said, "You did it, Emma. The shadow is gone for good." Though the mark on Emma's wrist remained, it no longer burned or felt cold. She realized it was a reminder of her bravery and the strength she found within herself. As the sun set that evening, Emma stood by her window, watching the peaceful village below. For the first time in months, she felt truly free. Even after the shadow was banished, Emma couldn't shake the feeling of unease. One night she woke up to a strange sound outside her window. It wasn't the shadow's roar or whispers, but a soft tapping. When she peeked outside, there was nothing there but the gentle sway of the trees under the moonlight. As she returned to bed, Emma noticed the mark on her wrist glowing faintly. She touched it, and for a brief moment, she felt a cold sensation running through her body. She whispered to herself, "Why does this feel like it's not truly over?" Deep down, she feared the shadow had left something behind. The next morning, Emma decided to visit the library one last time. Though the shadow was gone, she felt drawn to the place as if it held answers she hadn't yet uncovered. The library looked abandoned, its once ominous aura now replaced by silence. She stepped inside and felt a strange calmness, but as she walked through the aisles, she noticed a single book lying open on a desk. The pages were blank except for one line scrawled in red ink. "The mark is the key, but beware the cost." Emma's heart raced as she realized the shadow's story wasn't finished. It had left her with a choice she didn't yet understand. Determined to uncover the truth, Emma examined the library more carefully. She noticed the floorboards near the basement door were uneven. Prying them open, she discovered a hidden staircase leading down into darkness. Gathering her courage, Emma descended with a lantern in hand. The air grew colder with each step, and the faint sound of whispers returned. At the bottom, she found an ancient chamber filled with symbols carved into the walls. In the center was a pedestal holding a small black stone. The stone pulsed with a faint light, and Emma felt an undeniable connection to it. As Emma reached out to touch the stone, a voice echoed through the chamber. "Do not take it unless you are ready to face the truth," the voice warned. Startled, Emma looked around but saw no one. The voice continued, "The shadow left its essence here, tied to your mark. This stone holds the power to end it forever, or to unleash it again." Emma hesitated, unsure of what to do. She asked aloud, "What happens if I destroy it?" The voice replied, "The shadow will be erased from existence, but it will take a piece of you with it." The weight of the decision bore down on her as she stood before the stone. Emma spent hours in the chamber, debating what to do. If she left the stone untouched, the shadow's essence might find a way back to her. But destroying it could cost her more than she was willing to lose. She thought of the villagers, the peace they now enjoyed, and the sacrifices made to banish the shadow. Finally, she made her decision. Taking a deep breath, Emma picked up the stone. It felt cold and heavy, and the mark on her wrist began to burn. She put her hands on her wrist, began to burn. With all her strength, she slammed the stone against the pedestal, shattering it into pieces. A deafening roar filled the chamber as a blinding light consumed the room. When Emma awoke, she was lying on the floor of the library. The chamber and the hidden staircase were gone, as if they had never existed. The mark on her wrist had disappeared, leaving only a faint scar. She felt lighter, as though a heavy burden had been lifted from her soul. As Emma walked back to the village, the morning sun bathed Hollowbrook in golden light. The air was warm and peaceful, and for the first time, she felt truly free. Though she knew the shadow's story had come to an end, Emma also knew that her bravery would forever be a part of Hollowbrook's legacy. Days passed, and Emma started to feel at peace. The villagers resumed their routines, and the library remained a quiet place of knowledge. But one evening, as Emma sat by her window, she noticed something odd. A faint whisper called her name, soft but clear. It wasn't frightening, but it unsettled her. Determined to ignore it, Emma closed the window and went to bed. But as she lay there, she dreamed of the shadow. In her dream, it didn't seem menacing. Instead, it looked lost, as though searching for something. When Emma woke, she couldn't shake the feeling that the shadow's story wasn't fully over. While cleaning her house, Emma discovered an old letter tucked away in one of her grandmother's books. The letter was addressed to Eliza Thorne, the woman who had been connected to the shadow before Emma. The letter read, "The shadow is a curse, but it began as a guardian. Only the truth can set it free." Emma was stunned. A guardian? The idea challenged everything she thought she knew. She decided to revisit the village archives to search for more about the shadow's origins. As she flipped through the dusty records, she found a story about a protector spirit that had been twisted into darkness by betrayal. Emma discovered that the shadow was once a being of light, tasked with guarding Hollowbrook centuries ago. But greed and betrayal from the villagers had corrupted it, turning it into the menacing presence it became. Emma couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy for the shadow. As she read further, she learned of a ritual that could restore the shadow's original form. It required the scar of someone who had banished it and the light of a pure heart. Emma realized this might be why she still felt its lingering presence. Perhaps it wanted redemption, not destruction. Emma knew she had to make a choice. Restoring the shadow's true form was dangerous, but it might bring lasting peace to Hollowbrook. She sought Mr. Turner's help, explaining everything she had learned. He hesitated, but eventually agreed to assist. "If you truly believe this is the right path, I'll stand by you," he said. The ritual required the scar on Emma's wrist, a circle of white candles, and a sacred chant. They prepared everything in the clearing outside the library. As the full moon rose, Emma stood in the center, ready to confront the shadow one last time. The shadow appeared as soon as the ritual began, but it was different this time. It didn't roar or attack. It simply watched Emma with glowing, hollow eyes. As she recited the chant, the scar on her wrist began to glow, and the shadow's form flickered between darkness and light. The air was thick with energy as Emma spoke the final words. The shadow screamed, a sound filled with both pain and relief. Finally, slowly its dark figure dissolved, and in its place stood a faint, shimmering light. Emma felt tears in her eyes as she realized she had freed it from its curse. As the shimmering figure faded into the night, Emma felt a profound sense of calm. The air was warm, and the moonlight seemed brighter than ever. The mark on her wrist vanished completely, leaving no trace of the shadow's curse. Mr. Turner placed a hand on her shoulder and said, "You've done what no one else could. You've brought peace to the spirit and to yourself." Hollowbrook was forever changed. The villagers spoke of Emma's bravery for generations, and the shadow's tragic tale became a story of redemption and hope. Emma, too, found a new sense of purpose, knowing she had turned darkness into light. As she stood by her window that night, she whispered, "Rest well, guardian. Your story is finally complete." Life in Hollowbrook slowly returned to normal. The villagers were no longer haunted by the shadow, and Emma felt a quiet peace she hadn't known in years. But late one evening, she began hearing strange whispers again. They were faint but unmistakable. She stood up and went to the window, but nothing seemed out of place. The whispers grew louder, and Emma felt an odd pull towards the forest. The wind howled outside, and for a brief moment she thought she saw a figure moving in the shadows beneath the trees. Was it the shadow returning, or something new? Her heart raced, but she knew she had to investigate. The next day, Emma set out towards the forest with her lantern in hand. She followed the whispers, deep into the woods, past the old oak tree where she had once encountered the shadow. As she ventured further, the trees seemed to close in around her, their branches reaching out like long fingers. The air was thick with tension. Suddenly, she stumbled upon an old stone circle hidden beneath the underbrush. That was where she thought she had seen the shadow when she had gone there the first time. The stones were worn with age, but Emma noticed strange symbols etched into them. As she knelt to examine them, a cold gust of wind swept through the clearing, and she heard the whisper again, "It's not over." Emma's hands trembled as she traced the symbols on the stones. The whispering grew louder, and she felt an overwhelming sense of dread. She realized that the stone circle was not just a place of power. It was where the shadow had been born. The ritual that had trapped it in darkness had sealed a part of its soul in this very spot. Emma understood now. The shadow hadn't been completely destroyed. It had been divided. One part had been freed, but the other remained trapped, waiting to be released. The weight of this truth sank deep into her heart. She couldn't let the shadow's return ruin Hollowbrook again. Determined to finish what she had started, Emma returned home and began researching. She found a legend about the guardian spirit who had once protected Hollowbrook. It was said that the guardian could only be fully restored by someone with pure intentions, a person willing to sacrifice everything to protect the village. As Emma pieced together the final parts of the story, she realized she was the one who could end the curse for good. But it wouldn't be easy. The ritual needed to be performed at the stone circle under the light of the next full moon. Emma's heart raced as she prepared herself for what was to come. The night of the full moon arrived, and Emma stood alone at the stone circle. The forest was eerily quiet, and the air felt charged with an unnatural energy. She could hear the faint rustling of leaves, but the whispers were gone. It was as if the world itself was holding its breath. Emma held the old tome tightly in her hands. The final pages opened to the ritual she needed to perform. She had learned that the ritual required her to offer a part of herself to the spirit in exchange for its freedom. It was a sacrifice, one that might change her forever. With a deep breath, Emma began to chant the ancient words. Erlich had never been more terrified than she was at this moment. As Emma spoke the last words of the chant, the ground beneath her feet trembled. The shadows around her twisted and writhed as if something was breaking free. A figure appeared in the center of the circle, its shape faint at first, but slowly becoming more defined. It was the guardian spirit. Restored and glowing with a soft, ethereal light, but then the spirit turned to Emma. "Your sacrifice is required," it whispered. Emma felt a cold rush of fear, but she knew what she had to do. With a steady hand, she touched her chest and whispered, "I offer my heart to protect this place." The spirit's light flared, and Emma felt herself growing weaker. The guardian's form surrounded her, and for a moment, Emma felt as though she were being consumed by light. Her vision blurred and her body grew numb, but then, as quickly as it had come, the feeling passed. The guardian spirit was gone, and Emma was left standing alone in the circle. When Emma woke up, she was no longer in the stone circle. Her body felt strangely light, as if a heavy weight had been lifted. The moon still hung high in the sky, casting a soft glow over the forest. For a moment, Emma thought it was all a dream, but then she saw her hand. The scar that had once marked her wrist was gone. The air was peaceful, and the forest felt alive with calm energy. It was as if the shadow had truly been set free, its darkness gone for good. Emma stood up and looked around, but there was no sign of the spirit. The ritual had worked, and Hollowbrook was finally safe. Emma walked back to the village, her steps light and purposeful. As she entered Hollowbrook, she noticed that everything seemed more vibrant. The once dull houses now looked bright, and the people who had once lived in fear now smiled as they passed by. The shadow's curse had been broken, and the village had been freed from its grip. But Emma couldn't help but feel a sense of emptiness. She had made the ultimate sacrifice, but what had she given up? She couldn't remember the details of the ritual or the spirit's final words. It was as if some part of her had been left behind in the circle. She hoped that, in time, the answers would come. Weeks passed, and Hollowbrook continued to flourish. The strange occurrences that had once haunted the village were no longer happening. Emma returned to her work at the library, helping the villagers with books and knowledge. It felt like the village was healing, but Emma still wondered about her sacrifice. One evening, as she sat by the fireplace in her home, a knock on the door startled her. When she opened it, there was no one there. Just a small, glowing stone placed gently on the doorstep. Emma picked it up, feeling a strange warmth in her hand. It was the same glowing stone she had seen in the stone circle. Emma examined the stone carefully. She could feel a connection to it, as if it was calling to her. It had a faint pulse, almost like a heartbeat. She knew that this was the final gift from the guardian spirit, a token of the sacrifice she had made. It wasn't just a stone, it was a part of the spirit, left behind to guide her. As she held it in her hand, a soft voice filled her mind. "You have freed me, Emma. I will always be with you as the guardian of Hollowbrook." Emma smiled softly, her heart filled with warmth. The shadow had truly been transformed into something good. The guardian would forever watch over the village, just as it was meant to. One stormy night, however, Emma's peace was shattered. The wind howled outside and the rain pounded against her window. Suddenly she felt a chill run through her body. The stone in her hand began to pulse faster, its warmth turning cold. The shadows in her room seemed to shift and stretch, as if something was moving in them. Emma's heart raced. Could the darkness have returned? Was it the shadow, or something even worse? She clutched the stone tightly, but the shadow seemed to grow darker and more oppressive. It was as if the darkness was searching for her, trying to pull her back into the depths of fear. The next morning, Emma rushed to the village center, hoping to find answers. The villagers spoke in hushed voices, mentioning strange happenings at the edges of Hollowbrook. The trees were swaying unnaturally, and some claimed they saw dark figures moving in the woods. Emma knew this wasn't just the shadow, it was something else, something darker. The guardian's light had faded, but the stone in Emma's hand remained warm, a reminder that the battle wasn't over. She sought Mr. Turner's help, telling him everything she had experienced. He agreed to help her investigate, but they both knew the stakes were high. If something darker than the shadow had risen, Hollowbrook might not survive. Emma and Mr. Turner decided to venture into the heart of the forest, where the darkness had been growing stronger. The air was thick with tension, and the path seemed to twist unnaturally. It was as if the forest itself was trying to keep them out. Emma could feel the weight of the stone in her pocket, a constant reminder that she was connected to the spirit. As they reached the stone circle, they saw it an enormous, swirling mass of darkness, far larger than the shadow they had defeated. It seemed to pulse with malice, a force of pure evil. Emma realized that this was the true source of the curse, the darkness that had been sealed away long ago. It was up to her to stop it before it consumed everything. With the stone in her hand, Emma stood at the center of the stone circle, ready to face the darkness. The air was thick with a cold, suffocating energy. The darkness swirled around her, a violent storm of shadow and fear. But Emma was no longer afraid. The guardian's light still lingered within her, a beacon of hope. She spoke the words of the ancient ritual once more, but this time, the shadows did not retreat. They pressed in closer, threatening to overwhelm her. Emma felt herself weakening, but she knew she had to continue. With one final, desperate cry, she threw the stone into the heart of the darkness. A brilliant flash of light erupted, blinding her for a moment. When the light faded, the darkness was gone. Hollowbrook was safe. Emma collapsed to her knees, exhausted but triumphant. The curse was finally broken, and the guardian's light would forever protect the village. Emma had given everything to end the curse, but in the end, she had saved the one place she called home. The days following the battle with the darkness were calm. Hollowbrook seemed to breathe a sigh of relief, the air lighter, the skies clearer. Emma walked through the village, feeling the weight of what she had done. The villagers no longer whispered in fear, but spoke of the bravery that had saved them all. Yet Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something was still unfinished. The stone that had been left to her by the guardian now rested on her mantle, glowing faintly at night. It was a symbol of her victory, but also a reminder that her journey was far from over. She had sacrificed so much, but a part of her felt incomplete. Emma had begun to rebuild her life. She worked alongside Mr. Turner to help the village recover from the damage the darkness had caused. The once eerie forest now felt peaceful, and the nights were no longer filled with whispers of the shadow. The Guardian's light had truly healed Hollowbrook. But in the quiet of the evenings, Emma often found herself staring at the stone, lost in thought. The peace she had longed for was finally hers, but she couldn't forget what the spirit had told her. "I will always be with you." It was comforting, yet there was something haunting in those words. What did they mean for her future? One moonless night, Emma awoke with a sense of dread. The stone on her mantel had stopped glowing. She rushed to it, her heart pounding in her chest. The stone was cold, lifeless. Panic gripped her. She had come so far, fought so hard, and now the shadow seemed to be returning. She ran to the forest once more, where the stone circle awaited her. As she entered the clearing, the air grew thick and the shadows stretched long. There was something wrong. The darkness was not gone. It had only been waiting. Emma realized the shadow hadn't been fully defeated. It had simply been biding its time. In the heart of the forest, Emma uncovered a new secret. The shadow wasn't just born from the village's fears. It was tied to a curse older than Hollowbrook itself. The original settlers had made a pact with a dark force to protect their land, but the pact had been broken, and the curse had been passed down through generations. The stone circle had been the final seal, but it was incomplete. Emma understood now. The curse had to be fully undone, or the shadow would return forever. She had to find the source of the curse and destroy it once and for all. With her lantern in hand, she ventured deeper into the forest, where the truth awaited. Deep in the forest, Emma stumbled upon an ancient stone doorway, hidden beneath layers of moss and vines. It was unlike any other structure she had seen in Hollowbrook. The stone circle had been a marker, but this chamber was the true heart of the curse. With trembling hands, Emma pushed open the heavy stone door. Inside, she found a dark, forgotten room, untouched by time. In the center of the room was a large stone pedestal covered in intricate carvings. Atop the pedestal sat a blackened crystal, its glow dim but unmistakable. This was the source of the curse, the heart of the shadow itself. Emma stood before the crystal, feeling its dark energy pulsing in the air. She knew that to break the curse completely, she would have to destroy the crystal. But in doing so, she might destroy everything: her connection to the Guardian, the village's peace, and her own future. With a deep breath, Emma reached for the crystal. As her fingers brushed against its surface, a vision flooded her mind. Of Hollowbrook, of the Guardian, of the shadow. She saw the past, the broken pact, and the consequences of their actions. The weight of the choice pressed heavily upon her, but Emma was no longer afraid. With a steady hand, she lifted the crystal and crushed it. A blinding light filled the chamber, and the world seemed to tremble. The darkness shattered, and Emma felt a wave of relief wash over her. The curse was finally broken, and Hollowbrook was truly free. As the light from the shattered crystal faded, Emma stood in the now silent chamber. The shadows that had once danced ominously around her were gone, replaced by a calming stillness. The forest no longer felt haunted, and the weight of the curse had lifted from her shoulders. Hollowbrook was free at last. When Emma returned to the village, it was as if the whole town had been reborn. The air felt fresh, the skies were clearer, and the once heavy atmosphere had been replaced with lightness and peace. The villagers greeted her with smiles and gratitude, unaware of the deep sacrifices she had made. For Emma, the journey had come to an end, but her life in Hollowbrook was just beginning. The days that followed were filled with celebration and joy. The villagers worked together to restore Hollowbrook to its former beauty. The once dilapidated houses were repaired, the fields flourished, and the air was filled with the sounds of laughter. Emma, though exhausted from the trials she had faced, felt an overwhelming sense of peace. As she walked through the village, she noticed the changes. People no longer lived in fear. They no longer whispered about shadows or curses. Instead, they spoke of new beginnings, of hope, and of the bright future ahead. The village was healing, and Emma could see that her efforts had made a difference. Life in Hollowbrook slowly returned to a calm rhythm. Emma resumed her daily routine, but something inside her had changed. She was no longer the girl who feared the dark or the shadows that had once controlled her life. She had faced the deepest fears of her heart and emerged victorious. But even as the village thrived, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Not with fear, but with care. She often felt a presence beside her, as though the guardian was still there, guiding her. She couldn't see it, but she could feel the comforting energy surrounding her, reminding her that she was never truly alone. One evening, as Emma walked to the forest's edge, she noticed a soft glow in the distance. At first, she thought it was the moonlight playing tricks on her, but as she got closer, she saw a figure standing near the stone circle. It was a figure she knew well. The guardian. The guardian's form was translucent, shimmering with light, but its presence was unmistakable. It smiled at her warmly, and Emma felt a rush of emotion. "You have done well, Emma," the guardian's voice echoed in her mind. "The darkness is gone, and Hollowbrook is safe because of your courage." The guardian continued to speak, its voice filled with kindness and wisdom. "I will always be with you, Emma. Though my form is gone, my spirit will live on in the village you have saved. You are my light now, and you will guide others as you have guided Hollowbrook." Tears welled up in Emma's eyes as she listened. The guardian had always been her guide, but now it was her turn to carry that light. "Thank you," Emma whispered, her heart full of gratitude. "I will make sure Hollowbrook thrives, just as you want it." With that, the guardian began to fade, its form dissolving into the light of the stars. Emma stood there for a long time, watching the last traces of its presence disappear. It was the final goodbye, but in her heart, she knew the guardian would never truly leave. Years passed, and Hollowbrook continued to grow and flourish. Emma became a respected elder in the village, known for her wisdom and kindness. She often told the children the story of the shadow and the guardian, teaching them the importance of courage, hope, and community. The village had learned from the darkness that once consumed it. They had found strength in unity and love, and they knew that no shadow could ever defeat them again. Emma's legacy lived on in the hearts of the people, and as long as they remembered, the shadow would never return. Hollowbrook was free, and it would stay that way forever. It was a quiet evening in Hollowbrook, the kind of night where the only sound was the rustling of the leaves in the trees. Emma sat by the fire in her small cottage, the warmth of the flames soothing her tired body. Outside, the village slept peacefully, unaware of the dangers that had once lurked in their midst. Emma felt at peace, but something inside her still longed for the adventure she had left behind. She looked at the stone mantle where the faint glow of the crystal once rested. It no longer pulsed with power, but its memory lingered. Hollowbrook was safe, but Emma couldn't help but wonder if there were other places, other worlds where darkness still waited. That night, Emma dreamed of the shadow. In her dream, she stood at the edge of the forest, the darkness swirling around her like a thick fog. But this time, she was not afraid. The shadow whispered to her, its voice cold and distant. "You may have defeated me once, Emma," it said, "but I am eternal. I will always find a way back." Emma stood tall, her heart steady. "Not if I'm here," she replied. The shadow recoiled, fading into the mist. When Emma woke, her heart was racing, but she knew the truth. The shadow was gone, forever. The next morning, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that the shadow's words had been more than just a dream. She decided to visit the stone circle one last time, to ensure that the darkness would never return. As she walked through the forest, she felt a strange chill in the air, and the trees seemed to whisper her name. "I'm here." When she reached the circle, Emma knelt beside the stones. She could feel a presence around her, but it wasn't the shadow. It was something else, something old and ancient. The stones hummed softly, and Emma placed her hand on the cool surface. For a brief moment, she saw a vision, a warning. A new darkness was rising, one that could not be stopped with strength alone. The warning was clear. Emma understood now that the battle was far from over. The shadow she had defeated was only a part of a greater darkness, something that had been waiting for the right moment to awaken. As Emma stood in the stone circle, she realized that Hollowbrook's peace was fragile, and the balance could tip at any moment. Determined to protect her village, Emma sought out the elders of Hollowbrook, the ones who had lived through the village's darkest days. They spoke in hushed tones, knowing that the shadow was not just a physical being, but a force that could infect the hearts of people. The new darkness would come not with fear, but with temptation, luring the villagers into its grasp without them even knowing. Emma prepared herself for the battle ahead, but this time it would not be fought with weapons or spells. The fight would be internal. The darkness that loomed on the horizon would strike at the hearts and minds of the people, and only by standing together could they defeat it. She gathered the villagers, old and young, and spoke to them of the danger that still threatened them. The elders shared their knowledge of ancient rituals, but Emma knew that the true strength lay in their unity. They would need to trust each other, protect one another, and resist the temptations that the darkness would offer. The storm arrived sooner than Emma expected. The darkness came not with a shadow, but with a sense of doubt, a feeling of uncertainty that spread throughout the village. People began to question the peace they had found, to doubt their ability to continue living in harmony. The new darkness was a whisper, a suggestion, slowly eroding their unity. Emma stood at the heart of the village, her resolve firm. She called upon the villagers to stand with her, to remember the strength they had found in each other. Together, they would fight this new darkness, not with fear or magic, but with the power of their community. The village of Hollowbrook was on the edge of despair. The darkness had seeped into the hearts of the villagers, whispering doubts and fears that they had never known. Emma stood in the village square, her heart heavy, as she watched the once ununified community begin to fracture. But she refused to let the darkness win. With a deep breath, Emma called for the village gathering. As the villagers gathered around her, she looked into their eyes and saw the fear that gripped them. "We have faced worse than this," Emma said, her voice strong. "This darkness wants us to turn against each other, to divide us, but together we are stronger. We can defeat this." Emma's words gave the villagers hope. Slowly they began to remember the power of their unity, the strength they had found in each other. Together they would face the darkness. They gathered in the village center, holding hands, their voices rising in a chant of protection, a reminder of the love and trust they had built over the years. The shadows around them began to retreat, but they weren't gone. The darkness had taken root too deeply, and they would need to do more than just resist. It would take a true act of will to break its hold. Emma led the villagers in one final ritual, one that had been passed down through generations. They called upon the light within themselves, their inner strength, to banish the darkness once and for all. As the ritual unfolded, the ground trembled beneath them. The air grew thick with energy, as if the very earth was reacting to their resolve. The darkness fought back, whispering lies into the villagers' ears, attempting to sow seeds of doubt. Some faltered, others hesitated, but Emma stood firm, her voice steady as she called upon them to hold fast. The battle was not one of strength or magic. It was a battle of hearts and minds. The villagers had to believe in the power of their unity, in the goodness that existed within each of them. With every chant, every prayer, the darkness weakened, its whispers fading into silence. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't quick, but Emma could feel the shift as the last of the darkness was expelled. The ritual had been successful, but it had taken a toll. Emma was exhausted, her energy drained from the fight. The villagers, though free from the darkness, were weary, their minds and hearts heavy with the weight of the battle they had just fought. They had won, but at what cost? As Emma looked around, she saw the wariness in their faces. The victory had come with sacrifices, and the scars of the battle would remain. But Hollowbrook was alive, the village had survived, and the shadow that had once loomed over them was gone. In its place was a quiet peace, one that they would have to protect together. Lily. In the days that followed, Hollowbrook began to heal. The village worked together to rebuild what had been broken, both physically and emotionally. Emma, though tired, found strength in the people around her. They had fought the darkness together, and now they would rebuild their lives. As the seasons changed, the village began to flourish once again. The trees bloomed, the fields grew green, and the village buzzed with life. But Emma knew that the true healing would take time. It would be a journey, one that they would all undertake together. The scars of the past would remain, but they would not define them. Years passed, and Hollowbrook became a symbol of resilience. The villagers had learned that darkness could not break them, that their unity was stronger than any shadow. Emma, now an elder, sat by the fire, telling the children the story of the shadow that had once walked at midnight. She spoke of the courage, the strength, and the hope that had guided them through the darkest of times. And she reminded them that even though the darkness could return, they would always have the light to guide them. The legacy of Hollowbrook was one of unity, of love, and of the unbreakable bond between its people. And as long as that bond remained, Hollowbrook would never fall to the shadows again. As the years went by, Hollowbrook grew stronger, its people more united than ever before. Emma, now an elder of the village, had seen the village transform from a place of fear into a thriving community filled with hope. The children of the village would sit around her, eager to hear the story of the shadow that had once threatened them all. But Emma's heart still carried the weight of the battle. She knew that peace could be fragile, that darkness would always find a way to return if the people of Hollowbrook let their guard down. She made it her mission to teach the younger generation the importance of unity, trust, and the strength that lay within them. They would be ready should the shadow ever return. One day, as Emma walked through the village, a strange wind swept through the streets. It wasn't like the usual breeze that rustled the leaves. It carried with it a sense of unease, a whisper that seemed to speak directly to Emma's heart. She stopped, her breath catching in her throat. It felt as though the wind itself was trying to warn her. The wind grew stronger, and Emma's mind raced. Could it be possible? Had the shadow returned? She hurried to the stone circle where the battle had first been fought, her heart pounding in her chest. The wind followed her as if guiding her, and when she reached the circle, the whispers stopped. Everything fell silent, but the air felt heavy, like it was waiting for something. Days passed, but Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The wind, the whispers. It all pointed to one thing. The shadow had returned. It wasn't the same as before, though. This time it wasn't just a presence, it was a force, something that was moving through the land, unnoticed by most. They ventured into the deep forest, the place where the shadow had once been banished. The forest was eerily silent, the trees standing like silent sentinels, watching their every move. As they ventured deeper into the woods, Emma could feel the presence of the shadow growing stronger. It was everywhere, creeping along the edges of their thoughts, whispering doubts and fears into their minds. But Emma stayed strong. She knew that the strength of the village was in their unity, and that as long as they remained together, they could overcome any darkness. Written by Charles Robert Thirst. Emma gathered the village's elders and spoke to them about the feeling in the air. They listened carefully, their faces grave. The shadow may have been defeated, but it never truly left, one of the elders said. It waits, hidden in the quiet places, in the hearts of those who let their guard down. Emma knew that the shadow was more than just an enemy. It was a part of Hollowbrook's history, something that would always be present if the village wasn't vigilant. Determined to stop the shadow before it could fully return, Emma set out with a group of trusted villagers to search for the source of the dark energy. After hours of searching, they came upon a clearing in the forest, one that Emma had never seen before. In the center of the clearing stood a stone pedestal, and on top of it lay a dark crystal. The crystal pulsed with a dark energy, its surface rippling like water. Emma knew at once that this was the source of the shadow, the heart of the darkness that had returned to Hollowbrook. As they approached the pedestal, the crystal's pulse quickened, and Emma could feel the darkness closing in around them. It was a trap, designed to draw them in, to weaken their resolve. But Emma stepped forward, her heart resolute. She raised her hand toward the crystal, and with a voice full of conviction, she spoke the words of an ancient incantation. The crystal shattered with a deafening crack, and the darkness that had surrounded them was sucked into the shards. For a moment, the world stood still. Emma could feel the presence of the shadow one last time, as though it was trying to escape, to find a way back into the world. But this time, it was different. The shadow was no longer a part of them. It had been cast out forever. The wind died down, and the forest returned to its peaceful silence. The villagers, who had watched from a distance, rushed to Emma's side. They had done it. The shadow was gone, and Hollowbrook was safe once again. Emma smiled, knowing that this victory wasn't just hers, but the village's. Together they had faced the darkness and emerged stronger. Eel. The villagers returned to their daily lives, but the memory of what they had faced lingered in their hearts. Emma, though weary, found peace in knowing that the darkness was gone for good. The village was safe, and the fear that had once gripped them seemed to fade with each passing day. The winds, once filled with ominous whispers, now carried the scent of new beginnings. Flowers bloomed brighter than before, and the sun seemed to shine a little warmer. Hollowbrook had survived, and with it, the strength of its people had been forged in the fires of fear and darkness. As the days turned into weeks, Emma often found herself walking through the village alone, reflecting on the journey that had brought them here. The villagers spoke of the battle, but they no longer looked over their shoulders in fear. The peace they had fought for was real. It was in the laughter of the children, the bustle of the marketplace, and the quiet conversations shared between neighbors. Yet Emma couldn't ignore the feeling that this peace, though hard-earned, was fragile. The shadows may have been vanquished for now, but she knew better than anyone that darkness could return if they let their guard down. The battle had been won, but the war against fear was ongoing. Hollowbrook had to remain vigilant, and so would she. The next day, Emma gathered the village elders once again. Something in her gut told her that the peace they had enjoyed was more fleeting than they realized. "I heard it," Emma said, her voice low and serious. "The whisper is back. We need to be prepared. The shadow may not have been fully defeated." The elders exchanged worried glances. "It's possible," one of them said quietly. "The darkness never truly goes away. It hides, waiting for a crack in our defenses." Emma knew that the shadow would not be easily defeated. It had learned from their last encounter. This time, they would have to be smarter, stronger, and more united than ever. Emma decided to seek out the wise woman who lived on the outskirts of Hollowbrook. The woman, old and mysterious, had always known things that others didn't. If anyone could help them understand the return of the whisper, it was her. When Emma arrived at the woman's cottage, she was greeted with a knowing smile. "I've been waiting for you, child," the wise woman said. "The shadow you fought was not just a single entity. It was a part of something much larger. Darkness never truly dies. It only changes form." Emma listened intently as the woman explained that the shadow could take on many forms, feeding off fear and doubt. It was a force of nature, and they had to remain vigilant, for it would always seek a way back. Armed with the wise woman's words, Emma returned to the village. The villagers were already on edge, sensing that something was off. They could feel it in the air, the same unease that had spread through Hollowbrook years ago. The shadow was not gone. It was simply waiting for the right moment to strike again. The wise woman's warning rang in Emma's ears. Darkness never truly dies. Hollowbrook was facing a new challenge, one that would require not just strength, but wisdom and patience. The road ahead would be long and dangerous, but Emma knew that the village could face whatever came their way. Together they would stand against the darkness once more. As weeks passed, the villagers began to notice strange occurrences. Shadows moving where there were none, whispers in the wind that carried no voices. Emma, already on edge from the wise woman's warning, couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking just beyond the reach of their sight. She stood on the outskirts of Hollowbrook one evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The darkness that followed seemed to grow heavier with each passing day. Emma could feel it closing in on them, creeping slowly, silently. It was as though the shadow was learning, evolving, waiting for the perfect moment to strike again. One night, While searching through old village records in the library, Emma came across a forgotten tale. It was an ancient story passed down by the first settlers of Hollowbrook about a creature that fed on fear and darkness. This creature, known as the Veiled One, was said to be an ancient spirit that could take the form of any shadow, moving silently through the world, waiting for a time when humanity's hope would weaken. The more Emma read, the more she understood. The shadow was no mere creature. It was a part of something older, something that had existed long before Hollowbrook had even been founded. The Veiled One had been waiting for this moment, for the village to let down its guard, and now it was ready to return in full force. As Emma shared what she had discovered with the village elders, a sense of dread spread through Hollowbrook. The story of the Veiled One matched the signs they had seen, the whispers, the movement in the shadows, the unsettling silence that had followed them. The village had been at peace for so long, but now it seemed that the storm was gathering again. "We need to prepare," one elder said, his voice heavy with concern. "This is no ordinary threat. The Veiled One is ancient, and it will not be easily defeated." Emma nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility press down on her. The shadow had returned, and this time it was not just a force of nature. It was an ancient evil that had been watching and waiting for its moment. The villagers knew they couldn't fight the Veiled One with physical strength alone. They would need knowledge, courage, and unity to stand against it. Emma and the elders gathered the bravest and wisest villagers, forming a plan. They would search for any ancient artifacts or weapons that could banish the shadow for good. "Remember," Emma said to the group, "the strength of Hollowbrook lies in its unity. We will face this together." As they set out on their mission, a sense of purpose filled the air. Each villager knew that the battle ahead would be unlike any they had faced before, but they were determined to protect their home, no matter the cost. No one else was protecting it. The search led them deep into the forests once more, to a hidden cave that was said to hold the secrets of the village's founders. Inside, they found ancient markings on the walls, depicting battles against shadows and dark creatures. At the heart of the cave, they discovered an old chest, its surface covered in dust and moss. When Emma opened it, inside was a weapon unlike any they had ever seen, a sword made of silver and etched with glowing runes. "This is it," Emma whispered. "The blade of light." It was said to have the power to banish darkness for good. With the sword in hand, they knew that they now had a weapon capable of striking back against the Veiled One. But even with this powerful tool, Emma knew they couldn't face the creature alone. They would need all the help they could get. As Emma and the group prepared for the final battle, a heavy silence fell over Hollowbrook. The village was ready, but fear lingered in the air. The villagers knew that the Veiled One would not give up easily. It had waited for centuries, and it would not be destroyed without a fight. Emma stood alone for a moment in the village square, the weight of the sword in her hands reminding her of the responsibility she carried. She could hear the whispers of the shadow growing louder, could feel it watching her from the edges of her thoughts. But she wasn't afraid. She had faced the darkness before, and this time she would not let it win. The night of the battle arrived. The village gathered in the center of Hollowbrook, ready to face whatever came their way. The wind picked up, and the shadows began to twist and move, almost as though they had a life of their own. Emma, leading the group, held the blade of light aloft, the runes glowing faintly in the dark. As the Veiled One emerged, the Veiled One, its form a dark, shifting mass, its eyes glowing with malice. The ground beneath them seemed to tremble as the creature advanced, its presence overwhelming. But Emma stood firm, her heart steady. The villagers were beside her, their courage unwavering. The battle was fierce. The Veiled One attacked with waves of shadow, trying to overwhelm them with darkness. But Emma and the villagers fought back with the blade of light, each strike cutting through the shadows with a burst of radiant energy. The creature screeched, its form flickering and shifting as the light from the blade burned away the darkness. Emma swung the sword one last time, her arms strong and determined. The Veiled One let out a final, deafening howl as it was engulfed in a blinding light, its form dissolving into nothingness. The village was quiet once more, the battle finally over. The shadow had been defeated, for good this time. The village stood in silence after the battle. The air was thick with the scent of smoke and the lingering remnants of the Veiled One's shadow. The villagers had fought hard, but the victory felt bittersweet. They had defeated the darkness, yet the cost of that victory was clear in their tired faces. They had survived the battle, but there were scars that would never fade. The shadow had taught them all a valuable lesson, that light and darkness were two sides of the same coin, and both were part of their world. The village elders gathered often to discuss what had happened, ensuring that the history of the Veiled One would be passed down to future generations. Emma joined them, determined to make sure the village never forgot the price of peace. She knew that they would always be vulnerable to the darkness, but together they could face anything. Years passed since the defeat of the Veiled One. Hollowbrook had flourished again, but Emma never stopped watching the shadows. She had become a symbol of hope for the village, and her wisdom was sought after by many. Still, she carried the weight of the battle with her, a constant reminder of what they had overcome. One night, as she walked by the lake near the edge of the village, Emma paused. The winds were still, and the moonlight bathed the water in a soft glow. For a moment she closed her eyes and remembered the fear, the whispers, the darkness that had once ruled this place. She had been part of something greater than herself, a force that had stood against the tide of fear and survived. Though the shadows would always exist in the world, Emma knew that. They had done something extraordinary. They had faced the darkness and had come out stronger for it. The people of Hollowbrook had learned that the power to overcome fear was within them all. Peace had returned, not because the shadows were gone, but because they had learned to live alongside them, to keep the light burning even in the darkest times. Emma stood in the center of the village one evening, watching as the sun set behind the hills. She smiled softly, knowing that the people she loved were safe. The village would continue to grow, to thrive, and to face whatever challenges came their way, and no matter what, they would always have each other to turn to. As the seasons changed, Hollowbrook transformed. It became a place of legend where the battle against the shadow was told as a story, passed down from one generation to the next. Emma's name was spoken with reverence, and her story was one of courage, sacrifice, and light. But she knew that it wasn't just her story. It was the story of everyone who had stood beside her. The village had become a beacon of hope in a world that could sometimes feel too dark. Emma knew that the shadow would always be lurking, but it would never have the power to consume them again. As long as they held on to the light within themselves, they would never lose their way. Years later, Emma stood at the edge of Hollowbrook once more. The village had changed, its people had changed, but the lessons of the past remained. The shadow that had once walked at midnight had been defeated, but the spirit of Hollowbrook remained unbroken. It was a village that had learned to face the darkness, to stand strong, and to always walk in the light. Emma smiled as she looked out over the village, knowing that her journey had not only been about defeating an ancient evil, but about understanding the power of hope, unity, and resilience. And though the shadow would always be a part of their history, Hollowbrook would continue to live on, shining brightly against the darkness. The years passed, and Hollowbrook was once again a peaceful village. But as time went on, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that the Veiled One's shadow still lingered in the depths of the forest. Though the battle had been won, she knew that darkness was never truly gone. It only waited for the right moment to return. One night, as Emma walked through the village, a cold wind began to blow. She stopped, sensing something was wrong. The wind howled, carrying whispers of a familiar voice, and for the first time in years, she felt the chilling presence of the shadow. It wasn't gone after all. It had only been waiting, biding its time. The wind grew stronger, swirling around Emma as she listened carefully. The whispers seemed to form words, telling her that the shadow was not finished with Hollowbrook. It had found a new way to strike, using fear to manipulate the villagers once again. Emma understood then. The battle was far from over. The Veiled One had learned, adapted, and now it sought to turn the villagers' own fears against them. She ran to the elders, gathering them to prepare for whatever was to come. The sense of urgency was palpable. The village had grown complacent, thinking the danger had passed. But now, Emma realized that they had to be ready for the final test, one that would determine if Hollowbrook could survive the return of the shadow. The lights flickered. As the days passed, strange occurrences began to happen again. The shadows seemed to move in the corners of the villagers' eyes, and the air grew thick with unease. People spoke of nightmares and strange visions where the Veiled One appeared, feeding off their fear. Emma knew that the shadow's power was growing, and the only way to stop it now was to confront it once more. The village seemed to be on edge, with every person feeling the weight of the darkness closing in, but Emma refused to give in to the fear. She had faced the shadow before and emerged victorious. This time, she would need to rally the villagers, to remind them of their strength and the power they held together. Emma called for a village-wide meeting, hoping to unite the people of Hollowbrook in their fight against the Veiled One. The elders stood by her side, and together they addressed the villagers. "We have faced the darkness before, and we can face it again," Emma said, her voice steady despite the fear she felt. "But we must stand together. We must fight as one." The villagers, though scared, nodded in agreement. They had been through so much already, and they were not about to let the shadow take hold of their home again. Emma could feel the strength in their unity, the power of hope and determination that flowed through them. They were ready to face the darkness together. Emma and a group of villagers set out to find the source of the shadow's power. Emma and a group of villagers set out to find the source of the shadow's power. They ventured deep into the forest, to the very heart where the Veiled One had first appeared. As they walked, the trees grew denser and the air grew colder. Emma could feel the presence of the shadow, lurking just out of sight, waiting to strike. After hours of searching, they found an ancient stone altar hidden deep within the woods. Covered in vines and moss, it seemed to pulse with a dark energy. Emma knew instantly that this was where the Veiled One's power had originated. The altar had been the source of the shadow's strength, and if they destroyed it, they could finally end the threat for good. With the altar in sight, Emma took a deep breath and approached it. The villagers gathered around, ready to do whatever it took to destroy the dark energy that emanated from it. Emma raised the blade of light high, the runes glowing once more. With a swift motion, she struck the altar, and a powerful surge of energy erupted from it, shaking the ground beneath them. The shadow screamed, its presence weakening with each passing second. Emma felt the weight of the darkness lift, but the battle wasn't over yet. The Veiled One still existed in some form, and it would not go down without a fight. As the altar crumbled, the shadow began to gather, forming a massive, swirling cloud of darkness before them. The Veiled One emerged from the wreckage of the altar, its form more terrifying than ever. It was no longer just a shadow. It had become a force of pure darkness, a swirling mass of despair and malice. The villagers watched in horror, but Emma stepped forward, gripping the blade of light tightly. "This ends tonight," she said, her voice filled with determination. The villagers, inspired by her courage, stepped forward as well, forming a line behind her. Together, they would stand against the shadow. Emma charged forward, her blade cutting through the darkness with each strike. The Veiled One lashed out, but Emma's resolve was stronger than ever. The battle raged on, the light of the blade cutting through the darkness like a beacon. Emma's strikes were precise, each one weakening the Veiled One. The villagers fought alongside her, their collective strength adding to the power of the blade of light. They were no longer afraid. They had learned the true meaning of courage. Finally, with one last powerful blow, Emma plunged the sword into the heart of the Veiled One. The darkness screamed in fury before disintegrating into nothingness, its form vanishing completely. The air was still, the shadows gone. Emma stood, her heart pounding, but she knew it was over. The Veiled One was gone for good. As the villagers returned to Hollowbrook, the first light of dawn began to break through the trees. The village had been saved, and the shadow was no more. Emma looked around at the faces of her friends and neighbors, each one relieved and grateful. They had faced their darkest fears and emerged victorious. The sun rose higher in the sky, casting a warm golden light over Hollowbrook. Emma smiled, knowing that they had not only defeated the Veiled One, but had also discovered something far more powerful, the strength that lay within them all. The shadow had been vanquished, but their bond and courage would never fade. Years passed, and Hollowbrook flourished once again. The tale of the Veiled One became a legend, passed down through generations. Emma's name was remembered not just as the one who defeated the shadow, but as the one who taught the village that darkness could only be defeated with light, hope, and unity. Hollowbrook had been transformed. It was no longer just a village, it was a symbol of strength and resilience. Emma lived to see the village thrive, her heart content knowing that the shadow would never return. The legacy of the fight against darkness would live on forever, reminding all who heard it that the light within them was the greatest power of all. Years after the defeat of the Veiled One, Hollowbrook continued to prosper, but something strange began to happen. A new darkness, subtle but powerful, began to creep into the outskirts of the village. Emma, now older, noticed that the forest surrounding the village seemed to have changed. The once vibrant trees now appeared dull and lifeless, their branches twisted like forgotten memories. One evening, Emma decided to investigate. She ventured into the woods alone, her heart pounding with both excitement and fear. The air was thick with a strange, cold mist, and a sense of unease settled over her. As she walked deeper into the forest, she realized that something ancient and forgotten was stirring once again, hidden beneath the surface. The further Emma ventured into the woods, the more unsettling the atmosphere became. Whispers filled the air, soft at first but growing louder, as if the trees themselves were speaking. She stopped, straining to listen. The voices were familiar, echoing the same whispers she had heard during her battle with the Veiled One. It was as if the shadow had never truly left. It had merely been hiding, waiting to return. Suddenly, the ground beneath her feet cracked open, revealing a hidden path that led deeper into the earth. The air grew colder, and the whispers became a low hum, urging her forward. Despite the fear creeping up her spine, Emma knew she had no choice but to follow the path. The darkness was calling her, and she had to face it once more. Emma descended the path, which led her to an ancient underground chamber. The walls were covered in strange symbols, and the air was thick with dust and decay. In the center of the room stood a massive stone altar, similar to the one they had destroyed years ago, but this one was different. It seemed untouched by time, its surface smooth and cold. As she approached the altar, Emma realized that the darkness she had fought before was not the only force at play. The Veiled One had merely been a puppet of something far older and more powerful, a force that had been buried for centuries. The altar was its gateway, and it was awakening. Emma could feel the pulse of ancient power flowing through the chamber. The battle was not over. It was only just beginning. The air in the chamber grew thick with an oppressive energy as the whispers turned into a loud roar. Emma stepped back, realizing that the Veiled One had returned, stronger than before. It emerged from the shadows, its form more monstrous than she had ever imagined. The dark figure stretched to impossible heights, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly fire. This time, the shadow was not just a creature of fear. It was a manifestation of all the darkness that had ever existed, an ancient entity born from the deepest corners of the earth. Emma's heart raced as she gripped the blade of light once more. She knew she was facing something far more dangerous than before, but she was determined to stop it, no matter the cost. The Veiled One lunged at Emma, its darkness swirling around her, trying to consume her. But Emma stood firm, the blade of light glowing brighter than ever before. She swung the blade, striking the shadow, but it barely fazed the monstrous being. The darkness recoiled and then reformed, even more powerful. Emma realized that the blade of light alone would not be enough to defeat this ancient force. She needed more, something stronger, something that could counter the primal darkness. In that moment, she remembered the words of the elders. "The light within you is the greatest weapon of all." Emma closed her eyes, gathering all the strength she had within her. The light inside her heart began to grow, radiating outwards, matching the power of the blade. The chamber erupted in light as Emma unleashed the full force of her inner power. The blade of light was now an extension of herself, its glow brighter than ever before. The Veiled One roared, its form writhing as it tried to retreat from the pure light surrounding Emma. But Emma was unyielding. She pushed forward, her power growing with each step until she was surrounded by an impenetrable aura of light. The shadow fought back, trying to smother the light with its tendrils of darkness. The two forces collided in a clash of cosmic proportions, the room shaking as light and dark battled for dominance. Emma could feel her strength waning, but she refused to give up. She was not just fighting for her own survival, she was fighting for the survival of Hollowbrook and everyone she loved. As the battle raged on, Emma realized that the Veiled One's power could only be stopped through a great sacrifice. Emma closed her eyes, gathering all the strength she had within her. The light inside her heart began to grow, radiating outwards, matching the power of the blade. The chamber erupted in light as Emma unleashed the full force of her inner power. The blade of light was now an extension of herself, its glow brighter than ever before. The Veiled One roared, its form writhing as it tried to retreat from the pure light surrounding Emma. But Emma was unyielding. She pushed forward, her power growing with each step until she was surrounded by an impenetrable aura of light. As she lay there, breathing heavily, she wondered if she would ever return to Hollowbrook. Had she given everything for a victory that came at too high a price? Just as Emma's vision began to fade, she felt a soft touch on her shoulder. The villagers had followed her into the chamber, having heard the battle raging from afar. They gathered around her, their faces filled with worry and gratitude. Among them was a figure Emma had not expected to see, her mother, who had passed long ago. "I'm proud of you, Emma," her mother whispered, her voice warm and comforting. Emma smiled weakly, feeling her energy begin to return. The light inside her, though dimmed, was not gone. It would take time to heal, but she had fulfilled her purpose. Hollowbrook was safe, and for the first time in years, Emma felt at peace. The villagers returned to Hollowbrook, and life slowly returned to normal. The woods, once dark and threatening, began to heal, their trees growing vibrant once more. Emma, though weakened by her sacrifice, found new strength in the love and support of her village. She had defeated the darkness, not just with her power, but with the courage of everyone who had stood by her side. As she walked through the now peaceful village, Emma knew that the story of the Veiled One, the shadow that walked at midnight, would be passed down through generations. But the tale would not only be one of darkness, it would be a tale of hope, unity, and the light that could never be extinguished. Emma had proven that even in the darkest of times, there was always a way to bring back the light. The village of Hollowbrook had been free from the shadow that haunted it for so long. The villagers went about their daily lives, yet a strange stillness lingered. Though the trees had flourished again, there was an eerie calm that no one could quite shake off. It felt as though the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for something, though none knew what. Emma, now healed but changed by the battle, spent her days walking the forest's edge, hoping to understand the feeling that plagued her. Emma, though weakened by her sacrifice, found new strength in the love and support of her village. She had defeated the darkness, not just with her power, but with the courage of everyone who had stood by her side. As she walked through the now peaceful village, Emma knew that the story of the Veiled One, the shadow that walked at midnight, would be passed down through generations. But the tale would not only be one of darkness, it would be a tale of hope, unity, and the light that could never be extinguished. Emma had proven that even in the darkest of times, there was always a way to bring back the light. She closed her eyes, listening. The whispers seemed to carry a warning, a promise that what she had faced was not the end, but merely a beginning. The ground beneath her feet began to tremble, faint at first, but growing stronger. The presence she had felt for so long was no longer distant. It was closing in. The world seemed to shift, and Emma knew that her battle was not over. The shadows were not yet done with Hollowbrook. The village's peace was shattered when strange events began to unfold. Livestock were found in the fields, lifeless with no sign of injury. She closed her eyes, listening. The whispers seemed to carry a warning, a promise that what she had faced was not the end, but merely a beginning. The ground beneath her feet began to tremble, faint at first, but growing stronger. The presence she had felt for so long was no longer distant. It was closing in. The world seemed to shift, and Emma knew that her battle was not over. The shadows were not yet done with Hollowbrook. The village's peace was shattered when strange events began to unfold. Livestock were found in the fields, lifeless with no sign of injury. Trees were uprooted without explanation, their roots torn from the earth as if something had dug into the very heart of the forest. People whispered of strange figures seen moving through the fog at night, and Emma knew that the Veiled One's return was no longer a mere possibility. It was an impending reality. Emma sought counsel from the village elders, but even they seemed uncertain. The shadow she had defeated could not have returned so quickly. No, this was something else, something deeper. One elder, a woman with silver hair and eyes full of wisdom, told Emma that the Veiled One had been a mere servant to an older force, the source of all darkness. This dark force had been imprisoned long ago, and it was now stirring, seeking freedom. As Emma tried to make sense of the elder's words, the shadows continued to grow darker. The whispering voices became louder each night, filling Emma's dreams with images of an endless void, a place where light could not reach. She saw glimpses of a creature with eyes as dark as the abyss, reaching out toward her, calling her name. It was then that she understood. The true darkness had never left. This entity was the void itself, a being of pure darkness that thrived on fear and despair. Emma had fought the Veiled One, but the true enemy had never been revealed until now. She realized that the only way to protect Hollowbrook and the entire world was to face the void head-on. But she was not sure how. The elder had spoken of a powerful artifact, a relic of light, capable of sealing the void away once more. The search for this artifact would take Emma to the darkest corners of the world. Determined to find the artifact that could save Hollowbrook, Emma set off on a journey, leaving the village behind. Her path was unclear, but the whispers guided her, always just out of reach. Along the way, she met allies who joined her cause, each with their own reasons for wanting to defeat the void. There was Rylan, a skilled warrior with a troubled past, and Lyra, a young mage whose powers were just beginning to awaken. Together, they traveled through desolate lands, across mountains that seemed to stretch into infinity, and through deserts that burned with an unnatural heat. They braved treacherous forests filled with beasts that had never been seen before. Along the way, Emma learned that the artifact she sought was not just a weapon, it was a symbol of hope. It could only be wielded by one who had faced the deepest darkness and emerged still holding on to the light. After weeks of traveling, the group finally arrived at the ancient temple where the relic was said to be hidden. The temple stood tall against the backdrop of a mountain, its stone walls covered in strange, glowing runes. The air around the temple felt thick with magic, and Emma could feel the weight of it pressing on her chest. The path inside was treacherous, filled with traps and puzzles designed to test the heart of anyone who dared to enter. As Emma and her companions ventured deeper into the temple, they discovered that the relic was not a mere artifact. It was a living being, a creature of light that had been bound within the temple centuries ago. The creature was said to be the only force capable of opposing the void, but freeing it would require a great sacrifice, one that could not be undone. Emma knew that the time for hesitation was over. As Emma stood before the creature, the light within it seemed to pulse with a power that was both beautiful and terrifying. To release it would require her to give up her connection to the blade of light, her only source of power. Now listen to me. The relic's power would be transferred to her, but only if she was willing to make the ultimate sacrifice. She would become a vessel for the light, but at the cost of losing everything she had fought for. And hesitated, she thought of Hollowbrook, of her friends, and of the village that depended on her. But she also knew that without this light, the darkness would consume everything. The void would have no opposition. She closed her eyes and made her decision. She would sacrifice her own power to save the world, to give hope to those who would come after her. With a deep breath, Emma stepped forward and placed her hands on the creature, her heart full of both fear and determination. As she did, the light surged through her, flooding her veins with energy. The pain was excruciating, but Emma held on. She felt her connection to the blade of light shatter, its energy transferred into the creature. The light within her intensified, and for a moment she felt more alive than ever before. But as the energy flowed, Emma felt something else, a darkness trying to seep in. The void was aware of what was happening, and it would stop at nothing to prevent the light from being released. Emma could feel the tendrils of darkness reaching for her, but she stood firm. The light within her was stronger than the void's influence, and she knew that she was ready to face whatever came next. She knew that she was ready to face whatever came next. As Emma emerged from the temple, the air around her was charged with energy. The light she now wielded was pure and radiant, more powerful than anything she had ever known. She could feel the void stirring in the distance, but it was no match for the light she had become. Emma stood tall, her companions at her side, ready to face the darkness once and for all. The final battle loomed on the horizon, and Emma knew that it would not be easy. But with the relic's light, the power of the village's people, and the courage in her heart, she felt ready. The shadows that had once haunted her were now her greatest enemy, but Emma knew that no darkness could ever truly extinguish the light she had embraced. The clash between light and dark was imminent. The void, realizing that its freedom was at stake, sent waves of shadow to engulf the world. But Emma, now a beacon of light, stood at the front lines. With a single strike, she released the full power of the light she had embraced. The darkness recoiled, unable to withstand the force. But the void was relentless. The battle raged on, with Emma at the center of it all. Her strength waned, but she fought on, knowing that the fate of everything rested in her hands. The world trembled as the light and dark collided, the battle between them shaping the future of Hollowbrook and beyond. The battle raged on, the light from Emma's hands clashing against the void's darkness in a fierce storm of energy. The ground beneath them cracked, and the very sky seemed to shudder with the weight of their conflict. Emma fought with everything she had, but the void's presence was overpowering, pushing back against the light with an unrelenting force. With each passing moment, the shadows grew stronger, inching closer to Emma. She felt the energy within her beginning to fade. The sacrifice she had made was taking its toll. Her strength was fading, and the void seemed to sense her weakening resolve. The more Emma fought, the more the darkness crept into her thoughts, whispering that it was too late, that the world was already lost. As the void pressed closer, Emma felt something deep within her stir, a flicker of strength that refused to die. Her bond with the light had not vanished, it had only transformed. In that moment, Emma understood that the light she carried was not a weapon, it was a part of her, an essence that could never be extinguished by darkness. She raised her hands once more, this time with renewed purpose. The darkness faltered for a brief moment, as if it had underestimated her will. The shadows writhed around her, but Emma's light grew stronger. The bond she had formed with the relic, the creature of light, filled her with a surge of power she had never experienced before. The battle intensified, but Emma's resolve was now unshakable. She reached deep into her soul, drawing on every ounce of strength she had left. The shadows recoiled, shrieking in fear as Emma's light surged forward, brighter and more powerful than ever. The void had underestimated the power of the human spirit. With no upheaval, the local ancestral had failed to make peace with its long absence, but the darkness fought back with a fury that seemed endless. It clawed at Emma, threatening to swallow her whole. The very air seemed to vibrate with the tension between light and dark, as if the fate of the world hung in the balance. Emma knew that this was the final confrontation, and only one could emerge victorious. She pressed on, determined to be the one to defeat the void. Emma's strength was waning, but she fought with a desperation born of love and duty. The village of Hollowbrook, the people she had sworn to protect, were counting on her. As the void's influence grew stronger, Emma knew that the only way to end this was to confront the very core of the darkness itself. She stepped forward into the heart of the shadows, her body trembling from exhaustion. The darkness twisted around her, but Emma's light shone brighter than ever before. She felt the presence of the void not as a force of evil, but as a reflection of fear and pain. It was not invincible. It was merely a manifestation of the darkness within the world. In the depths of the shadows, Emma found clarity. The void was not an entity to be destroyed. It was a part of the world, a force that could not be eradicated. It existed because fear and despair existed. The true power of light was not in fighting against the dark. It was in embracing it, understanding it, and transforming it. Emma's heart opened, and she allowed the darkness to touch her, not with fear, but with acceptance. As she did, the void recoiled, its grip weakening. The light within her merged with the shadows, creating a new force, a force of balance. The battle between light and dark began to fade, replaced by a peaceful harmony that spread throughout the land. With the void's power diminished, Emma summoned the last of her strength. She called out to the people of Hollowbrook, urging them to stand together. The villagers, guided by the light of their own hearts, began to gather, offering their strength to Emma's cause. The power of unity was stronger than any darkness, and together they created a shield of light that enveloped the entire village. The void shrieked in rage as the shield of light closed in, trapping it in a prison of its own making. Emma stood at the center of it all, her heart full of peace. The darkness that had once threatened to consume everything was now contained, its power broken by the strength of the people and the light within Emma. The battle was over. The world had changed. Hollowbrook, once a village plagued by shadows, was now a place of peace. The forest had grown lush once more, and the people, free from the fear of the void, could finally rebuild their lives. Emma, though exhausted, felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She had not only defeated the darkness, but had also learned to understand it. The people of Hollowbrook celebrated their victory, but Emma knew that their true strength lay not in the defeat of the void, but in their unity. They had faced the darkness together, and in doing so they had discovered the true power of light, the power of love, hope, and understanding. Years passed, and Emma's name became legend. Stories were told of the young woman who had saved Hollowbrook from the darkness, and how she had taught the world to embrace both light and dark. The village flourished, and the lessons Emma had learned were passed down through generations. Though Emma had long since passed, her legacy lived on. The people of Hollowbrook never forgot the lesson she had taught them, that the light within each of them was stronger than any darkness, and that it was through unity and understanding that they could overcome even the greatest of evils. Despite the peace that had settled over Hollowbrook, Emma's spirit could sense that the darkness was never truly gone. It lingered in the corners of the world, waiting for a moment of weakness to strike. The people of Hollowbrook were stronger now, but they were not invincible. The shadows would always be a part of them, a reminder of the trials they had faced and overcome. Emma's spirit, now a part of the village itself, stood watch over the land. She knew that the darkness would one day return, but she also knew that the light would rise to meet it. The cycle of light and dark would continue, but the people of Hollowbrook would always be ready to face whatever came their way. The years passed, and the world moved on, but Emma's story lived on in the hearts of those who remembered her. Hollowbrook thrived, a beacon of light in a world that would always be balanced between shadow and light. The legacy of Emma's courage, wisdom, and understanding endured, and the village remained a place where darkness could never truly win. And so the cycle continued. The shadows would always rise, but the light would always shine brighter. As long as there were people willing to fight for what was right, the darkness would never have the last word. The world would always have a champion, whether seen or unseen, to protect it from the darkness. The wind howled through the trees as the villagers of Hollowbrook continued their lives. But there was a strange feeling in the air. Something was different. Emma's light had created peace, but the whispers of the shadows lingered. People began to speak of strange dreams, visions of a dark figure moving in the distance, watching them. Emma's spirit, still bound to the village, felt the change. The darkness was subtle, creeping into the hearts of those who had once been free from fear. It was not the void returning, it was something else. The villagers did not understand it, but Emma knew the shadows were evolving. They were learning to move in silence, to blend in with the night. One night, as the moon shone brightly over Hollowbrook, the darkness seemed to deepen. It was no longer just an absence of light. It was a presence, tangible and thick, seeping into every corner of the village. The people could feel it, an overwhelming sense of dread that made it hard to breathe. Emma's spirit sensed this new threat, and it filled her with unease. It was different from the void. This darkness was born of fear itself, something more dangerous and elusive. It fed on doubt, on the vulnerability of the human soul. Emma had faced the void before, but this was something that could not be fought with light alone. As days passed, the darkness continued to grow stronger. The villagers started to behave differently, more paranoid, more fearful. Strange things began to happen. People would hear footsteps behind them in the night, but find no one there. Shadows would move when no one was looking, always lurking just out of sight. Emma, desperate to protect the people she had saved, searched for a way to understand this new force. She realized that the darkness had found a new way to manifest itself, through fear, doubt, and the unknown. It could no longer be fought in the same way as before. To defeat this new enemy, Emma would need to find a new kind of strength, one that came from within. The people of Hollowbrook became increasingly suspicious of one another. The shadows seemed to have a life of their own, moving in ways that defied logic. It was as if the very essence of fear had taken form, and it was stalking them all. Emma could feel the weight of it, pressing down on the village like a suffocating blanket. One evening, as Emma's spirit wandered through the village, she saw something that made her heart stop. Figures moving in the darkness, their eyes glowing faintly. They were not human, not anything she had ever seen before. They were like shadows given life, creatures born of fear and darkness, drawn to the energy of the village. They were hunting. The creatures of the night began to gather, watching the village with an insidious purpose. Emma knew that the villagers could not face these new shadows alone. They were too powerful, too elusive. She gathered her strength and reached out to the people of Hollowbrook, urging them to stand together once more, to face this new darkness with courage. But even as she spoke to them in their dreams, Emma knew that the battle ahead would be different. The strength of light and unity would still be important, but the fight would require a deeper understanding of the shadows. The villagers would need to confront their own fears, to face the darkness within themselves, if they were to have any hope of defeating this new enemy. Emma's search for answers led her deep into the forest, where the first darkness had been born. She had to understand what she was facing before she could protect the village. As she ventured deeper, the shadows seemed to close in on her, whispering her deepest fears. The forest was alive with the sound of her heartbeat, her breath quickening as the pressure of the darkness grew stronger. In the heart of the forest, she found the source of this new fear, a twisted, dark tree that pulsed with an unnatural energy. The tree was the embodiment of fear itself, feeding off the doubts and insecurities of the villagers. Emma understood now that this darkness was not something that could be fought with light alone. It could only be conquered by confronting the fear within each individual. End of section 1. The villagers were at their breaking point. Fear had taken root in their hearts, and they could no longer distinguish between the real and the imagined. People began to disappear, vanishing without a trace, only to return days later with hollow eyes and whispers of strange, terrible things they had seen in the darkness. Emma knew that time was running out. The darkness was not only affecting the villagers, but also the land itself. The once lush forest was dying, the trees withering as if they too were succumbing to the fear. The very life of Hollowbrook was fading, and Emma realized that if she did not act soon, the village and the world would be lost. Emma gathered the remaining villagers who had not yet succumbed to fear. Together, they formed a circle around the dark tree, each person holding a small light, a symbol of their courage. Emma spoke to them softly, her voice steady despite the weight of the darkness pressing in on them. "We cannot defeat the fear with strength alone," Emma said. "We must face it together. Each of us must confront the shadows within ourselves, and only then will we have the power to stop this." The villagers, though frightened, nodded. They had no other choice. They began to speak of their fears aloud, sharing their deepest insecurities, their pain, their doubts. And as they did, the darkness began to weaken, the trees' pulsing energy flickering as if in response to the courage of the people. As the villagers spoke their fears, Emma felt a spark of hope ignite within her. The more they shared, the more the darkness seemed to retreat. It was not gone, but the power it had over them was beginning to fade. The villagers' courage had created a new kind of light, one born of vulnerability and understanding. The creatures of fear, who had once lurked in the shadows, now hesitated. They were no longer as powerful as they once had been. Emma understood that the darkness could only thrive where there was fear and isolation. But when the villagers stood together, sharing their pain and their strength, the shadows had no hold over them. The time had come for the final battle. With the villagers' courage fueling her, Emma stepped forward, her heart filled with determination. She reached out to the dark tree, her hands glowing with the power of unity. As her fingers brushed against its twisted bark, the darkness recoiled, writhing in fear. The battle between light and dark was at its peak. The villagers stood together, each holding their light, facing the creatures of fear with unwavering courage. The air was thick with tension, the world holding its breath as the final confrontation began. Emma knew that this was the moment that would decide the fate of Hollowbrook and the world. Emma's hands glowed brighter than ever before, and with a final, powerful push, she released all the light within her, all the strength the villagers had given her. The dark tree shuddered, its twisted roots breaking apart as the darkness began to shatter. The creatures of fear howled as they were torn apart by the force of the light. The shadows, once all-consuming, faded into nothingness. The village of Hollowbrook and the world beyond was finally free from the grip of fear. The villagers, exhausted but triumphant, collapsed to the ground, their lights still glowing faintly in the darkness. Emma, her mission complete, stood in the center of the village, watching over them. As the first rays of dawn touched the land, Emma felt peace settle over her. The village was safe once again, and the darkness had been defeated. But she knew that the true power had not been in the light alone. It had been in the courage of the villagers, in their willingness to face their fears together. Emma's spirit watched over Hollowbrook for many years, ensuring that the lessons of unity and understanding were passed down. The village prospered, no longer plagued by shadows, for they knew that as long as they stood together, no darkness could ever truly overcome them. The light within their hearts would always shine brighter. Years passed, and Hollowbrook flourished in the peace that Emma had secured for it. The village had grown stronger, wiser, and more united. Yet, deep in the hearts of the villagers, a new fear began to stir. It wasn't the fear of the shadows themselves, but the fear of forgetting them. The fear that darkness could return if they ever grew complacent. One evening, a strange figure was seen walking along the outskirts of Hollowbrook. A cloaked figure, whose presence seemed to chill the air itself. The villagers whispered in fear. Was it the shadows returning, or had something darker been born from the remnants of the past? The figure, moving like a shadow itself, was never seen clearly. Some claimed they had heard its footsteps. Others felt an eerie coldness when it was near. It would vanish before anyone could approach. But each time it appeared, the fear in Hollowbrook grew. Emma, though no longer in the physical realm, could still feel the stirrings of unrest. She searched through the village's memories, reaching into the hearts of those who had once faced the darkness. The fear had returned, but it wasn't the same. It was a new form of darkness, one that crept in silently, sowing distrust and paranoia. Emma knew she had to find out the source before the village fell into the same trap of fear that had once consumed it. Emma began to delve into Hollowbrook's history, seeking any forgotten tales or secrets that might explain the strange presence. She discovered an old story, one whispered among the oldest villagers, about a secret that had been buried for generations. It was said that a forgotten pact had been made with the shadows long before Emma's time, a pact that had kept them at bay, but also tied the village's fate to the darkness. This pact had never been fully understood, and its conditions were unclear. Some said that as long as the villagers honored the pact, they would remain safe, but if they ever broke it, the shadows would return. Emma realized that the village's peace had not been without cost. The shadows were never truly gone. They were simply waiting for the right moment to return. The figure continued to appear at night, and with each passing day, the fear in Hollowbrook grew. Emma could no longer ignore it. She reached out to the villagers in their dreams, trying to warn them of the threat that was slowly creeping into their lives. But the fear was too strong. Every warning was met with doubt, and every whisper of caution was seen as paranoia. The villagers were divided. Some believed that the figure was just a shadow of the past, while others feared that it was the sign of something much darker. Emma's spirit, trapped between the worlds, could only watch as the fear took hold once more. The village was slipping back into the grip of darkness, and Emma knew that unless she could break the cycle, they would once again be consumed by the shadows. Emma had learned in that battle that people lived within the shadows. Emma decided to confront the source of the darkness head-on. She returned to the heart of the forest, where the dark tree had once stood. But the tree was gone. In its place was a small, unassuming stone, inscribed with an ancient symbol. Emma touched it, and a surge of energy shot through her. The stone was the key to the forgotten pact. She read the inscription aloud, deciphering the words with great difficulty. The pact had been made long ago, not just with the shadows, but with a being who thrived on fear and uncertainty. Thank you for joining us on tonight's journey here at Stories for Sleep. We hope this story helped you unwind and find the peace you were looking for. If you enjoyed tonight's tale, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss a soothing escape. Sweet dreams, and we'll see you next time with another story to guide you into a restful sleep. Good night.